Hi, everyone. How's everyone doing? Awesome. Enjoying the panels and the talks so far? I heard yesterday day one was a blast. And day two seems to be awesome as well. Like, I love the data governance and ethics uh, fireside that just happened. Alexandra and Alec, wonderful job. So, um, without further ado, we are going to talk about looking beyond theory, how to operationalize AI ethics in the industry. And before I introduce my wonderful panelists, I want all of you to take out your smartphone and take a second to tweet out. Let's do that. Yeah, we are still doing that. So let's do that with the official hashtag of ReworkDL. No phones on my panelists here, but I'll just give you a minute. That's why I brought my phone. Lead by example. All right, so everyone's done with that? All right. I'm going to quickly introduce myself and then pass the baton to my panelists. My name is Shilpi Agarwal. I'm the founder and CEO of Data Ethics for All Foundation. It's a global community that is built, first of its kind, that is built to educate and learn and discuss end-to-end data ethics pipeline and also all the use cases that come with it, including artificial intelligence. We are less than 2 years old and growing fast. Today we are 1,100 members from 54 countries and a global viewership of 50,000 audience. And I invite all of you to join Data Ethics for All and help us build a better AI future together. And now let me introduce, go ahead, you guys introduce yourselves.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kinjal Basu. I am currently the tech lead for responsible AI at LinkedIn. I lead a group of around 15 people which spreads work across fairness AI, explainable AI, as well as privacy. And we are the central core team that is actually supporting all AI use case as well as product use case in the domain of responsible AI across LinkedIn. Yeah, and I'll hand over to Navrina.
Thank you so much. Navrina Singh, founder and CEO of Credo AI. We are an early stage startup building industry's first governance platform so that you can actually operationalize responsible AI at scale. I'm also a board member with Mozilla, guiding their trustworthy AI initiatives, and a young global leader with World Economic Forum, enabling organizations in Europe, Canada, and Singapore with their AI policies. Olivia?
Thanks. I'm Olivia Gamblin. I'm first and foremost an AI ethicist. I'm also the CEO and founder of Ethical Intelligence. Ethical Intelligence is an ethics as a service provider. We utilize ethics as a decision-making tool for both risk mitigation and innovation. And we are a global, again, a global network of different experts from verified ethics professionals backgrounds.
Thank you. All right, so I think we all agree here that building ethical, transparent, fair, and responsive AI systems is in the best interest of everyone, like the company as well as the customers, to earn their trust. But operationalizing AI ethics is not always as easy as it seems in theory. And today's panel, we are going to talk about these exact challenges. And so my first question to the panelists is, what is the top challenge you see in operationalizing AI ethics in the industry today? And we'll start with Kinjal.
Yeah, so one of the most critical challenges that we see is non-uniformity in teams. Especially in large organizations, there are different teams that are working on very different initiatives. And especially in the fairness and the ethics domain, there is not a clear solution as what is the metric that they should look for. So understanding what metric to optimize for in the sense of fairness is very, very critical. And that is one of the biggest challenges that we have today. I'll go a little bit into some more details as we progress through the talk, but I'll leave it to Navrina to talk a little bit more on this.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting. We see that a lot. Like, what does good look like in terms of responsible AI? and especially in terms of governance, is a big question mark right now. But I think even if you just step back, why we should do it. So what we are finding with an organization is there's a question mark around economics of ethics. So right now, it's still seen as a soft metric, not as a strategic area that an organization should be investing in. It's only when you step back and think about it's not just for regulatory relevance, it's not just for managing your financial or brand risk. It's when you start thinking about it from trust perspective, that if you're actually building fair, auditable, compliant artificial intelligence, you'll be able to build that trust with end customers, unlock more sales, retain customers longer. And I think that understanding does not exist within an organization. So there's a lot of work that we are doing at Credo, working with Global 2000 organizations, really stepping back and asking them not only what does good look like, but the economics of ethics as they start to think about the business impact of these applications at scale.
So at Ethical Intelligence, we work primarily with startups and SMEs, and one of the biggest challenges that we see them facing is lack of access to resources. So a lot of the frameworks that are created, a lot of the organization and processes that are out there openly accessible are designed for larger companies. A startup with 5 people does not have the ability to create a full governance process, but they do have the ability to create time and space throughout their workday at which they can address these types of challenges. So from my perspective, one of those biggest challenges in AI ethics right now for the smaller sized companies is actually finding the resources. So finding the skill set that is required for this kind of work, finding the time in their day, and finding the principles and the values and frameworks that they can adapt to their own size and then grow with them as they go.
Thank you. Do you also feel that ethics is a very low bar, like the compliance is a low bar, and the conversation of ethics has to go way beyond compliance? And because the companies have a fiduciary responsibility, they are not talking about the ethics of the entire data pipeline as well as so much about the artificial intelligence as they could, because it is a low bar. Ethics is not so much on the radar yet. Is that something you agree with?
I think I already mentioned that what we are seeing, so Credo AI, our customers are primarily Global 2000s in finance and banking, retail, HR, government, and high tech. And I don't think it's a low bar, it's a lack of education. Again, around why should I be taking on governance, which, as Alec was mentioning, is a barrier. It's seen still as a friction point. I think the mindset shift needs to happen that it's not a barrier. It's actually going to make your business better.
Enablers,
because
yeah.
you can build better technology. So I would say that what we are finding is it's a lack of education and awareness and skill sets around what does it really mean when we say responsible AI, but more importantly, once you understand what responsible AI means, how do you actually put it into practice to see the business outcomes that will be important for the board, for the C-level, for your customers, for your employees, internal and external stakeholders.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead.
And education is something that is very, very critical. I think there is a general notion there in today's society that if you bring in fairness, it will potentially create a loss in your true north metrics of your overall product, right? Your sessions might drop, your revenue might drop, and that kind of creates a barrier between people, whether or not they should do it. So sometimes just barely clearing the compliance is somewhat enough. But we need to educate people that potentially in the long run, if we do bring in these things around a proper responsible product use, proper ethical standards, then overall, maybe in the long term, your actual member base will increase, your sessions, your revenue, and these kind of things will actually have a positive impact.
Yeah.
Compliance is only half the story. So just as in life, we exist on a scale of worst case scenario and best case scenario. Technology exists on that same scale. We can have doomsday, dumpster fire. You can probably tell that I work a lot with startup founders when I'm using that terminology, but we have doomsday, and you are using compliance and risk mitigation to prevent that doomsday. But that's only getting you halfway there. That's only using ethics as half the tool that it really can be. If you flip it on its head and actually use it as an innovation tool where you sit down with your design teams and you're going, okay, we need to gain the trust of our customers. How do we do that? How do we design for that trust? all of a sudden you are turning ethics into this amazing tool, this amazing enabler for innovation within your company that will set that company aside for a competitive advantage. So then you start to actually open up into what is really the powerful side of ethics that we've seen. And so I'd like to stress that compliance, very important, but if you're compliant, you're one step above being illegal. Let's do better than that.
Yeah.
Yes, true. All right. So did you want to add something that you mentioned, Kinjal, in the beginning that you were saying?
No, so basically that idea, right, that this notion of we might lose metrics and that's really, really bad, but that's not necessarily the case. With appropriate product design, which is responsible design, we can have a best of both worlds situation.
Absolutely. And since you guys are veterans in the industry, I would love to talk about best practices and case studies, since this is a very hands-on, practical kind of implementation panel. I would like to start with Olivia this time. At Ethical Intelligence, you have done a lot of work with your clients with frameworks, ethical frameworks. You even have an ethics as a service independent board. So tell us, how do you bring all the stakeholders on board, the challenges that you face, and how you've overcome those in implementing and operationalizing AI ethics?
Yeah, so we like to break it down into three categories, where we have technology, process, and people. So when we're working with companies, we're looking at their technology specifically. So those are questions looking at what kind of data sets are you using? What kind of features do you have in your models? Those can actually border on very existential questions about technology quite often. Then process, that is all about governance and compliance, like we've been talking, making sure there are frameworks in place, making sure there's policies in place, even all the way down to making sure there's a common definition so people are all talking about the same thing throughout the entire company. And the last one was people, that's really focused on the culture. Is the culture accepting of actually going through these conversations and accepting of these challenges? We like to turn it from ethics as this scary thing where we're telling you you're a bad person to this is a challenge, this is an opportunity for us to build a more robust product, and how can we approach this with a sense of curiosity? And as Shipley was saying, we have something called the EI Ethics Board, which, again, we work with small companies, and they have a lack of resources. So what we've done is actually created a ethics as a service product that allows you to more or less outsource an ethics department. So it's getting that ethics expertise in there as an independent board and being able to guide in certain decision-making processes to help bolster up your skill set within the company. So we often, again, work with design teams, we work with marketing teams, and we work with data science teams are the main ones that we start to see the biggest impact of ethics guidance and the ethics skill set put into place.
I want to ask a follow-up question. So when a client comes to you, do they already have in mind that I want to put an ethics framework in place, or they come with that? And who are mostly like, is it the C-level who comes to you? Is it the marketing department? Like which department? And do they already know what they want?
Yeah, so we have a way of assessing companies where they're at in their ethics maturity training. We have companies that come to us that say, I need ethics. And you're like, that's great. What do you mean by that? I want 5 in blue. I'm like, okay, let's start there.
Yeah.
So we actually have a process at the beginning of every time we work with a client where we're analyzing where they're at in their maturity journey. And it's called, we run diagnostic reports to be able to understand, okay, you are here in terms of this understanding, this is where you want to get, how do we get from A to B? And we start to put those in place. Quite often, we are mainly working with upper level management or the C-suite. We have actually had lone data science wolves come to us and say, I really need help. And that's how we get in and start talking with a company. But primarily, it's coming from top-down leadership.
Nice. Navrina.
Yeah, I would say it's very similar for Credo AI as well. There's obviously a growing understanding among the C-level executives that, to not only thrive, but to lead an AI journey and AI revolution, they need to bring responsible use of technology within the company. So we at Credo, we are big believers in products. So we have a SaaS product, which is a holistic governance platform that provides you oversight and accountability. And given that Olivia already did our spiel, we have 3 layers of trust that we have within this product. The first layer of trust is really focused on people and processes, because as you can imagine, going back to the compliance checks, which is just a small category of this entire governance process, you still want to know, are you doing the right things? Do you have the right people? Are you following the right frameworks? And so that's like the first layer of trust within Credo AI. The second layer of trust, as you know, adopting Olivia's language, is around technology. And this is where Credo AI has built core IP, where we interrogate data sets and models, so that based on what you've aligned on as what good looks like, you can actually see are your models, your data sets doing those things. And this is a really critical component for us, because out of everything, this is the only objective measure. Because as you can imagine, with people and processes, it's kind of subjective. But as you're interrogating the data sets and models, that's the objective measure of risk within your systems. And then the last layer of trust, which is a critical one for us, is we call it trust with the context. As you can imagine, you can have the same set of models powering two different applications which have very different risk profile. And an example that I love to give is one of our largest clients. They use the same set of models for facial recognition that can be used in unlocking your phone, and that can also be used for access control in a building or surveillance. So if you think about those two context areas, it's drastically different, and the risk profile and governance is very, very, I would say, needs to be managed differently. So for us, the last layer of trust is really in context of the use, whether it is a regulatory environment that this use case will be operating in, whether it's a use case like the one I just described. And this is where it's really important within Credo AI platform that we are able to bring in the existing regulations or upcoming regulations and help companies get ready for it. And happy to dive deeper into our SaaS platform in a bit.
Yeah, thank you. I do have a question on that. So who is a typical Credo client? Like, at what stage do they come to you? Have they identified that they need help with compliance, or they want to make sure that their AI systems, they are going to roll it out and they are ethical or not? So at what stage?
So most of the way we think about the market is, you have the AI first companies, and these are companies that have been deploying machine learning models at scale for the past 5 to 6 years. And then you have a massive middle, which we like to call as tech forward. And these are the organizations, they might have centers of excellence around AI, but they're not using AI at scale in the wild and in the production environment. And then you have, the laggards. We obviously don't focus on the laggards. But within the AI first category, there's an emergence of ethics forward companies. So right now, most of our clientele is, I would say, AI first, ethics forward. One, that they're already deploying machine learning at scale, let's say within finance and banking, in underwriting, risk scoring, portfolio optimizer, or in case of HR and talent management, in automated decision-making systems, whether it's for resume parsing or whether it is for training, et cetera. So first and foremost, they're already deploying machine learning at scale. Second, many of these organizations have established new centers of governance. And these are very unique, interesting centers where they're bringing in people from data science, and they're bringing in people from oversight functions, whether those oversight functions are compliance, risk, and other areas. And so we are seeing that these teams have a unique need because they're bringing these multi-stakeholders together to manage risk. And then the third characteristic, especially, is that they might have AI use cases at different stages. One, a model that has already been in production for the past 4 years, and now they're like, I need to bring that into governance because I never looked at governance previously. Or they have AI use cases right now in development, and they're like, we want to bring in governance now so that it's not too late before we put it in production. Or when they're just starting on that journey and thinking about a brand new AI use case. So that's the core characteristics of the companies.
All over, all across the spectrum. So talking about AI algorithms for scale, Kinjal, your team at LinkedIn provides content recommendation at scale, right? So how do you make sure, and we all know about so many different companies that are under the heat now, so about how do you make sure that content recommendation at scale is done ethically, transparently, and in the benefit of the users?
Yeah, so that is one of the most critical problems to solve today, I feel. In order to do that, we are taking some of the baby steps, but it's actually well structured at the moment. So the way we are thinking about it is kind of on the lines of intent and impact. So it's always a good intent that we have that, okay, before deploying anything to production, let's make sure that the fairness metrics are okay. Let's sure that there's proper representation in the data. If we are training a model that is basically has a very large set of population, which is the overall, let's say, a majority group, but very few representation from a minority group, we should make sure that the data is well balanced. So there are these kind of checks and balances that are being placed before even training a model. Now, once you train a model with this system, you definitely need to measure certain fairness metrics. Now, it's critical to understand what to measure because, let's say, a recommendation system that is showing people can be very different than a recommendation system that is showing content versus jobs and so on and so forth. So what exactly is the right metric that we are choosing? That becomes critical. So these are all part of intent, right? That it's a good idea to do this, let's check before ramping anything out. But what happens once we ramp it? Once this is actually hitting production, let's say real members are interacting with this system, then we need to measure that it's actually doing the job that it was supposed to. So we need to place in A/B experimentation onto the system where we are not only experimenting that, hey, maybe we're getting a lot more clicks because of this model, but what is happening? Like, are people equally interacting? Is, for example, if you look at, let's say, gender or race, are people from different communities actually interacting similarly? Or is it the case that only certain section of the population is getting the best out of it, but there's a lot of people who are not really getting anything out of it? So looking at it from the impact point of view is very, very critical because that is where we are actually being able to inform or understand what exactly is happening. And then we close the loop by understanding that and bringing back to our drawing board where we are now reformulating potentially a new model to develop. So this entire cyclic procedure is very critical. Like from the get-go, we want to do responsible design that involves proper training data, proper modeling, testing before deployment. And once it's deployed, we do need to measure proper metrics for fairness, as well as then bring them back into the pipeline again to start the next set of iteration. So this kind of cyclic setup is definitely something that we are thinking about as we are rolling every product into the marketplace.
So you talked about the metrics that you measure, right? So clicks is one metric. So talking about polarization and spreading disinformation, right? So, I mean, that's driven with clicks. Like, so would you be measuring clicks and actually creating more polarization and disinformation? How do you tackle that?
Right, so there always has to be a balance, right? So clicks is one of the, let's say, a metric that we are looking at, but at the same point of time, we are looking at different kind of fairness metrics. Let's say there's something in the economics literature known as the Atkinson Index that basically tries to track whether a group of people are equally being treated well or not. So it kind of comes from economics literature that says how well is the concentration or how well is the inequality in an overall population. So we measure metrics like this. We also measure metrics like let's say if it's an engagement metric, is the engagement similar for men versus women or something like that. So to quantify, it's not just that maybe if a small section of people is keeping on clicking on something and it's going viral, it has to be done in a way in which it is uniform. But at the same point of time, there are other trust metrics in place, which kind of checks that the thing that is actually going viral, should it go viral or not, right? What kind of content is it? Is it proper content or does it need to go through content moderation? And that's a whole different line of work that people also look into.
And also like the smaller network that you're connected to, it seems like these social networks favor if you have clicked or shown any engagement on one person's response, one connection, it keeps showing you that kind of content over and over, especially from that person. And then it again leads to further polarization because now I'm not exposed to other content, and it may also lead to confirmation bias at some point. So how do you tackle that?
Right, so this in literature is known as the rich getting richer effect. It's basically the sense that if you connect to somebody and you're getting more and more value from them, then that kind of network is basically growing, but there are minor communities that are kind of getting lost. In order to tackle this one problem or this specific problem, we try to do things called the explore exploit schemes, where it's not just the case that we are like supremely just optimizing what you're getting overall, but trying to extract different contents from different communities and showing that overall. So it's kind of like a more of an exploration stage where we try to understand, okay, maybe you have seen a lot of this. What is your behavior on a very different kind of content, maybe coming from a different set of creators and so on. And with that kind of nature, it's a cyclic process that's happening to try to rebalance the setup a little bit more. And at the end of the day, it's always a marketplace setting, right? Like there are creators who are creating and there are viewers who are seeing things. So if there's only a small segment of creators who are getting all the likes or the comments, then it doesn't create a healthy marketplace. And it's very, very crucial to have a healthy marketplace so that we get overall improved systems as well. So short term is often kind of looked not really very highly because we want to look at what is the downstream impact of the system as well.
Absolutely. So what are some of the pitfalls that you would advise to avoid? We'll start with Navrina this time.
Pitfalls.
To avoid, for governance and operationalizing AI ethics.
That's a great question. There's so many. So I think one of the things that we are finding is within organizations, there's already a plethora of tools, and we are seeing emergence of MLOps tools. You might have GRC tools, which is governance, risk, and compliance, and then you have model risk management tool. And all these tools have a different set of capabilities and skills that they need. So I think first and foremost, understanding that AI risk is a very unique kind of risk that can't be solved by these tools. And what we are finding, one of the biggest pitfalls is that organizations are trying to shoehorn their way into using some of these tools to say, hey, can I just do a checkbox on I did AI governance? That's one, I would say, massive barrier. The second thing that we see, and then I'll let others talk as well, is the lack of standardization. So there's so much learning, whether it's a content moderation system or whether it's another kind of recommender system. There's a set of emerging, I think, traits and metrics and qualities that can be standardized across organizations. And what we are finding is that because of the silos that exist, companies are not making a very intentional effort to standardize those metric understanding, those processes, and the kind of skill set that people need to have governance at scale. So I would say those are the two basic ones that we are seeing, but happy to dive deeper into more.
Yeah, Olivia, do you want to add?
Yeah, absolutely. So there, of course, as Navrina said, there are multiple pitfalls, but I'd say probably the biggest one that we run into is the thought that ethics is a checkbox activity.
Yes.
That it is a one and done, we're ethical, yes. No, that's not the case. It's really much more a journey. It's something that's ongoing. It's something that you can continuously improve on. And sometimes that feels very daunting to teams, especially teams that are used to checkbox activities. They're used to saying, okay, I've done this. I don't have to think about this anymore. So a lot of pitfalls that we see is turning ethics into that checkbox activity and then focusing in on it of, okay, we must hit these checkboxes. What that does to teams is it burdens them of, well, we got to do this. We have to go through these, and it's almost kind of boring, when really ethics is anything but boring. It's actually something quite beautiful and fascinating to work in and to work on for teams if it's put in the right context. So that pitfall becomes burdensome, and what happens is teams take shortcuts so that they can check the box instead of actually going through the process and implementing what that checkbox was designed to do. It also, what it does is create this culture of negativity towards ethics. It actually will prevent a lot of adoption at times if it's seen as I have to go through yet another step. So that the other aspect of a big pitfall that we see here is viewed more as a checkbox activity and rather as an ongoing journey, an ongoing process, is that frustration of, well, I'm checking more checkboxes, and that I'm not getting anywhere, that we're just having to do this over and over and over again. So really, Navrina, going right off of what you said, it's that kind of complication that comes in that's a huge pitfall.
Thank you. Kinjal, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I think it's very similar, like making teams or giving teams the education that this needs to be done and this is something that should come from their core rather than, hey, you have to do this. I think that is one of the biggest challenges that we see. And if we can give them that education that, yes, this is the right thing to do, and at the end of the day, if you do it, it's actually going to make the overall system a lot better, I think giving them that education is basically what is one of the biggest
So
challenges.
do you see education should be in what department, like compliance and legal, or should it be across the board? Like where exactly should this training and education happen?
So I think it should be done throughout. So for example, within LinkedIn, anytime, let's say, an AI engineer joins, he is put through a boot camp where he is not only taught about the systems that's there internally, but we are now placing these kind of educational courses on what is AI ethics, right? So just giving them from the very basic start that, okay, think about these things in your day-to-day. Because as you're thinking about things more and more, then you can potentially be able to replicate them in your day-to-day work.
Very true. Great point. So what are some of the trends that you, oh, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, I guess I have two thoughts. One thing that we haven't talked about, and I'd be really curious for panelists' thoughts.
Yeah.
One is, with ethics and especially focusing on like only education, it still really puts the impetus on individuals as opposed to broader systems, broader market forces. The real tension that exists between being first to market and essentially capitalism
True.
and ethics. And so continuing to focus on education, like how do we actually update those structures? Is
True.
one piece. And the second one is the concept of fairness. I think that it's great to talk about fairness and fairness being something that's in all ethical principles, but really,
Yeah.
what does fairness mean? There's 20 different definitions
True.
across social sciences, quant,
Absolutely.
law, legal, etc. And in reality, it can really mean whatever people would like.
Interpret,
to understand.
yeah.
And so, I guess that is a challenge that we see consistently is actually grappling with notions of fairness.
Yes.
Taking into consideration overrun representation is one aspect, but
True.
then building a predictive policing tool that will continue to target
True.
Black communities. So I can easily argue that's fair.
True.
So those are the two things that I see as, tantamount challenges, and just curious for some perspectives on throwing that in the last minute.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah.
Would love to jump in here. So the whole aspect of education, I like to think of education and training in AI ethics as a way to warm up a team. So
Yes.
they have that muscle already going,
Yeah.
but it is so important to have an ethicist or a group of people that it is their responsibility to think through these problems. One of the things I like to not jokingly say, but say when you have an ethicist, it's like having a mental computer right next to you. So you have in technical departments, they're offloading a lot of that computation onto the computer itself, onto other processes and systems. When it comes to ethics, it's very mentally heavy. There is a lot to think through. There's a lot to go through. An ethicist is trained to walk through those frameworks and walk through those problems. And so what happens is if you have a team that is trained in the importance of ethics, they are able to identify the situations that they need to talk to an ethicist for. And so then they have the fallback onto the ethicist of saying, hey, I'm faced with this problem, what do I do? The ethicist can sit down and go, okay, here are your options. Let's take 5 minutes, let's walk through, let's get the decision and get you back on your feet and running, rather than that poor person spending hours and hours trying to remember the training they went through or just getting frustrated and giving up. So that is the importance of having training complemented by the skill set in-house. And then I can also speak to your fairness point as well, and I don't want to take up too much time, but we're working actually currently with a client, a fairly large bank, and they are working with their data scientists going, what is fairness? And we're literally working with them on the definition of it, because one of the things that we noticed was across their entire department, their data scientists were using a lot of ad hoc tools and metrics, which was fantastic to see that there was already that effort. Their struggle, though, was every single time they sat down for a conversation with more than two people in the room, was what is fairness? How do we define this? So we started working with them. We had said, okay, well, we can't use fairness as equal opportunity. We can't use fairness as equal outcome because there's too much conflict. There's too much nuance that's being missed there. So what we've been doing with them is looking at, if we define fairness as equal quality of service at the end of the day, what does that look like? How do we create systems and models within the bank that allow for equal quality of service? So people from different demographics and different groups being able to still have the same service. It looks different because for different demographics, that quality is going to need to look a little bit different. How that quality is delivered will need to look a little bit different. But that we've noticed a lot of success in allowing nuance within the data science department to be able to understand okay, little bit to allow for biases that may exist, but also to allow for different understandings of fairness to come together into one central definition.
Thank you. I want to add something to what you mentioned. So education, yes, is important, and having an ethicist to go to also for questions is great. But at Data Ethics for All, what we try to talk about is an ethics first mindset. Is basically no matter where you start, ethics should not be an afterthought, and it has to run across the entire organization. Like, doesn't matter what role you are in, or what position you're in, or what department. You think about ethics in your everyday life, in your everyday day-to-day job from the get-go. Like, it shouldn't be an afterthought. And also having one ethics person, expert is great, but having a cognitive team of experts, because we are human beings at the end of the day, and we bring our personal experiences subconsciously into the bias, into this conversation, whether we know it or not. And so having a cognitive team of ethicists who can look at the same problem from different angles and lenses, and can provide a solution, or even help us identify, hey, have you looked at this? Have you thought of this? Or maybe the data doesn't look, and what does fairness mean? Like, maybe it will mean different. If you talk to 5 people, fairness will mean different things to different people. So having these KPIs from different people, not just from within the company, but maybe even outside, do market research on what that means to the customers or the audience that you're going to deploy the solution with, will help us come up with better KPIs to understand what fairness is, so that we can have a better product at the AI solution. Does it make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Yes. Lots of food for thought.
Yeah, for sure. Any other questions? I think we are ready for questions. Yes.
Question.
Yeah.
How do you deal with ethics when you're deploying a model not just internally, but you're licensing it to clients, or you're selling it, for example, as a SaaS to clients? Because obviously, when you're developing it in-house, you can, do a bunch of things on the ethical side to make sure it's developed in an ethical way. But once
True.
you hand it off to your clients, then obviously you kind of lose control over the use that they do with that. And so, how do you deal with that aspect of the ethical chain link?
I'll let someone.
Yeah, happy to answer. I'll give you 2 examples. So many of our clients right now are in finance and banking, and in financial sector, they're building machine learning-based models that they sell into issuer banks. So as you can imagine, there is this point in time governance that they have to provide when they're selling their model into, let's say, a Bank of America or Barclays or something. That point of time is pretty much dictated by things like SR 11.7, which is Model Risk Management Guidelines, right? So I think the best thing a company can do is, at that point of time, what does that assessment really look like? How holistic it is, right? And if you think about the other side of the equation, which is, New York City just passed a law on December 10th with mandates. If you're an employer in New York City, if you're buying a third-party HR system, which is ML-based, you need to provide a fairness audit. So in that case, again, you can think about, there's a point-in-time assessment that the vendor can provide, but once you bring it within your organization, there needs to be that continuous governance that Olivia was mentioning that needs to happen, so that same, you have that point of time, but now that it has to be contextual as well. So what we are seeing within companies is, one, the point-in-time assessments are really critical, but then this ongoing governance, which is contextualized based on your data, your practices, et cetera, is what's really critical.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think